in part 2, we're going to continue on with the most highly tested Michigan bar exam essay topics. So we're going to continue on with evidence, which is the 6th topic we're discussing. In evidence, they like to test hearsay, convictions for impeachment, and mimic. I recommend that you review recent evidence essay questions as usual. This is my advice for everything, to review recent questions because you'll see how they've been testing evidence recently. It's been a little bit kind of unusual. For hearsay, you should be able to define hearsay as an out-of-court statement used to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and you should be very familiar with the most common exceptions and exclusions. So historically, they've really liked to test things like excited utterance and present sense impression, and party admission, otherwise known as statement by a party opponent or statement by opposing party. So these have been their favorite to test historically. Recently, they've also liked to test former testimony exception, the business records exception. The important thing is that you not only know the rules, but you also know how to apply them, because I'm sure, as you've realized, hearsay can be kind of tricky. Historically, the Michigan Board has also liked to test convictions for impeachment. The Michigan Board of Law Examiners actually likes to test the Michigan distinction on this. So under federal law, a crime of dishonesty could automatically be admitted against a witness to impeach them. And then a felony in general could be admitted against a witness to impeach them. In Michigan, we're similar to federal law, but we say a crime of dishonesty can be admitted, or a felony, so long as it's a theft felony. So we narrow the scope of felonies that can be potentially admitted against witness to just theft felonies. And the Michigan Board of Law Examiners likes to test this. I would review those dates that are in the handout because they'll show you exactly how this is tested on the Michigan bar exam. And then lastly, mimic is tested. It's been tested recently, and I would review some of the more recent essays. It's pretty straightforward, but people do have trouble with these essays. They tend to be a little bit on the long side. All right, next we'll talk about constitutional law. Note that of the most recent 5 Michigan bar exam essays that have tested constitutional law, 3 of these essay questions were actually very crim pro-y, okay? Like February 2018 and 2020 had confrontation clause issues. So sometimes you'll see what looks like 2 crim pro questions, but actually one is going to be considered constitutional law. We'll talk about some of the highly tested issues in just a second, but I really quickly want to let you know that sometimes you will see kind of a random looking question on the bar exam. Con law tends to test issues that sometimes people don't know how to respond to at all, and they just have to BS their way through it. So if you see a question that's really tricky and you don't know how to respond to it, just type confidently, write a long essay, hope the grader's having a glass of wine. Usually you'll be able to pick up between 3 and 5 points without honestly knowing what you're talking about. What you don't want to do is just write one sentence and move on to the next essay questions, because if you write one sentence, you'll probably get a score of a 0 or a 1. So don't do that. Instead, you want to write long essay questions, even if you're not on point at all. Again, generally they'll grade easier and they'll still give you some points. So we see this happen all the time. So the key is write a long essay answer, pretend you know what you're talking about, even if you don't, particularly for con law questions. Now, if you do get a traditional con law question, of course, they could test free speech. You want to know the First Amendment very well. I would look at the July 2012 question on commercial speech, because this issue has come up a couple times. And if you know these 4 factors for commercial speech, you'll be in good shape on an essay that tests this. I would also look at the February 2017 essay on school speech, because school speech has come up in the past. And again, it's kind of a standard issue. If you see something like this, you want to get it right. Equal protection clause has not been tested a ton recently, but you should know the 3 levels of scrutiny under the equal protection clause and when they apply. Typically, the Michigan bar exam will test something like rational basis, and the plaintiff will generally lose if rational basis is at issue. They've tested age a couple of times, socioeconomic issues a couple times, and again, the plaintiff usually loses. Same with on the MBE, if you've answered MBE questions on this. And then lastly, I would be very familiar with the Dormant Commerce Clause. I know nobody likes the Dormant Commerce Clause. It's kind of boring, but you should be familiar with how it's applied and the typical approach that the Michigan Board of Law Examiners will take. Typically, they'll talk about discrimination and they'll talk about burdens and they'll analyze the problem. Usually the statute's struck down. I'm not saying it's always struck down, But I would look at some of the past Michigan bar exam essays that test this. I would start with July 2014 for a really good example and kind of memorize the model answer and how the Board of Law Examiners approaches that question. Because if you see the Dormant Commerce Clause, you'll probably be expected to take a very similar approach. Next is real property. So real property is virtually always tested. Most people do not like real property on the bar exam. So it's one of the harder subjects for students to learn and memorize. The good news is that it tends to be semi-predictable in how it's tested on the essay portion of the Michigan bar exam. So even if you really struggle with the MBE portion, you should be able to kind of figure out what to write on the essay portion. They like to test race notice statute. You should know that Michigan's a race notice jurisdiction and be able to define that and apply the law. They like easements and fixtures. More recently, they've also liked to test tenancies. Again, I would review as many past essays as possible because this is a pretty predictable subject and it's the best way to kind of get good at spotting the issues that they like to test. Okay, next is civil procedure. Again, this is a subject that you'll more likely than not see on the Michigan bar exam. It's one of the Michigan Board of Law Examiners' highly tested subjects. And the topics that they tend to test in CivPro can be semi-predictable. For example, they like to test subject matter jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction is occasionally tested. I would say about once every 3 to 4 years. It's not tested at every bar exam like some people think. It's not a law school exam where you're guaranteed to see personal jurisdiction, but it does come up. So you should know what general jurisdiction is, and then you should know about Michigan's long-arm statute, because you'll be expected to talk about both of those briefly in a personal jurisdiction essay. Lastly, you should know the rule for motion for summary disposition under MCR 2.116C10. The C10 motion is tested pretty frequently. In fact, it was just tested in February 2020. You should know how to support a motion for summary disposition, what's going to count, what doesn't count. Look at some of these past dates where this is tested, because if you look at these, if you see an essay that tests this issue, you'll be in good shape to answer it correctly. Also, definitely make sure that you know the standard that the moving party must produce evidence to show that there's no genuine issue of fact, and then the burden will shift to the non-moving party, which will produce evidence to show that there is a genuine issue of material fact. So I would keep that in mind as you go through CivPro questions. The other thing, if you're taking a commercial course, that you might want to review is case evaluation. And the only reason I'm saying this is I find that some people who take commercial courses aren't as familiar with case evaluation. I'm not sure if they're not covered or they're not covered in depth, but they do appear on the Michigan bar. This issue does appear on the Michigan bar exam. So I would look at February 2017, February 2011, and even February 2007 for examples of how case evaluation is tested on the Michigan bar exam. Again, that's February 2017, February 2011, and February 2007, especially if your course does not cover it in depth. The last thing I want to talk about is domestic relations. 6 issues tend to be the Board of Law Examiners' favorites. They like to test marital versus separate assets, spousal support factors, the 100-mile rule, established custodial environment, best interest of the child, and prenuptial agreements. So these have been tested repeatedly since 2007. They've gotten away from things like common law marriage, validity of a marriage, property division under common law. Those don't come up very much now. One thing to note is that some of the recent essays have been trickier. You have to pay close attention to the facts and the call to question, and they'll test kind of tangentially on one of their favorite issues. So basically, I know I sound like a broken record, but I would make sure that you're reviewing recent Michigan bar exam essays, because you want to see how family law or domestic relations been tested recently in case it's tested the same way again. Because it's been a little bit trickier recently than it has been, like than it was in 2016, for example. So keep that in mind. All right, next we'll pick up with personal property.